Welcome to the Hedge for Humanity podcast, where we explore innovative ideas and the forward-thinking people behind them. In this episode, Brandon Venetta speaks with Floyd Marinescu. Floyd is the CEO and co-founder of C4 Media, which provides software development news to over 1.2 million people, as well as live conferences throughout the year. He helps curate the CEOs for Basic Income movement in Canada and founded the nonprofit UBIworks, aimed at educating and promoting universal basic income. Among other things, Floyd talks about UBI from the perspective of business owners, why it is a politically agnostic idea, and the benefits of running companies remotely in the digital age. Thanks, and hope you enjoy.
Welcome back to the Hedge for Humanity podcast. This is such a huge honor to have Floyd as our guest. We were introduced about a year ago and through Andrew Yang's connection, and just learned more about what he's about and the projects that he's involved with, and for him to take some time to share his knowledge and passions with our community is such an honor. So would love to make an introduction to Floyd Marinescu here.
It's great to be here.
Cool. Well, could we get a little bit about who you are, where you've come from, and what you've built in your business career and personal life?
Yeah, so I went to University of Waterloo for clients back in the day, and somehow found myself in a career building developer communities. I ran a news website called theserverside.com, writing all the news at some point, and later started my own business in 2006, running infoq.com, which is a news website. Infoq.com, which is a news website for software engineers and programmers, has over 1 million readers a month in 5 languages. And we also have a conference called QCon that runs in New York, San Francisco, London, Beijing, Shanghai, and Sao Paulo, serving about 7,000 software engineers a year with amazing talks and content presented by other fellow engineers working in cool companies. And our biggest one is in San Francisco every November with 1,600 attendees and 150 speakers, all from kind of the Bay Area's best software shops. And the company that runs it itself is fully remote, over 50 people in 11 countries, all with the shared core values, shared purpose, shared mission. And it's been a real pleasure to kind of create this new age sort of modern style of running a company, which has actually informed a lot of why what brought me to Basic Income, the fact that companies can run this way. And it's completely disrupting sort of the local economics of how people think countries' economics are supposed to work. So that's a bit about me.
Yeah. There's a few things that really impressed me as I learned more about your business, is the remote, like how you all interact with, and you guys do like an annual like retreat or work session. Can you tell us a little bit about the core values of how you have engraved that at the foundation of your business, and how you've seen it kind of flourish into your employees and into your people that come around these conferences?
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk to 2 things you mentioned, the use of core values and also how we run remote. And I guess third would be one of the meetings we do to foster culture. Well, firstly, I won't talk too much about core values. This is an absolute must for any serious team or organization that is more than like 3 people. Should start defining their core values. And those are the shoulds and shouldn'ts of any group. They're not your beliefs. Those should be a separate list if you want to list your beliefs. Like if you believe well, anyway, but your core values are really just how we all understand what the shared sense of normal is in any group. One of the most useful benefits of the core values is using them for acknowledgements. So we have a culture internally where in some of our internal social network, we invite people to acknowledge others when they see examples of the core values in action. We use the core values when we give praise, when we also give feedback, critical feedback. And it really helps to kind of depersonalize sticky personal situations and put them in the context of sort of what our shared values are. and it's also really makes it it makes it easier to make tough decisions and also to validate good decisions like promotions and stuff. So core values are really important. It's a very underutilized tool. They're not beliefs, right? Because we can have a company where people have all kinds of different political backgrounds or views on things can work together because our values are the same, even if our beliefs are different. Beliefs should not really be a part of the corporate environment that let people have the privacy of their own beliefs. But the values is different. That's the behaviors. So that's a bit about core values. So we've ran remote since the beginning. Before I started this business, I was lucky to be a remote management team member of a US-based startup working from my dorm room in University of Waterloo in Canada, and seeing that it's possible. So, before even blogs existed, or back when Skype was what you used before Slack, we ran remote. And so before I started my company in 2005, I read the book The World is Flat. And I thought, well, hell, if IBM and all these other companies rather can hire all over the world, then so can I. And so when we started C4 Media, we just started right away. Like the three co-founders, one was a VP of sales based in San Francisco. There was me based in Toronto as the product, content, overall vision guy. And then we had a chief architect living in Romania. And then the very first employee we hired was a kid in China who just graduated, and we hired him because we wanted to have a Chinese version of our business up and running as soon as possible. So we were fully remote across continents from day one, and it didn't matter where you live, because when you're using mainly online communications methods, it makes absolutely no difference where you live. And from that point of view, then you can leverage globalization to its best. And what I mean by that is there's certain roles that you can hire anywhere, where literally you can pull from the world's best. Other roles where you want to hire specifically in, say, developing economies, because you can afford to hire more people that way because they're not necessarily specialized, and then you have that opportunity to do that. And I found that doesn't matter what country someone's from. We have people in 11 countries. We have the same core values. We have the same purpose. We use the same management tools, the same meeting structures. We don't outsource. We just hire all over the place. And whenever we have a new flag on the org chart, it makes me happy. So doing it this way has been great. We have very low turnover. Like, people don't leave. It's cool to be part of this global group. And we can afford to have twice the staff this way. So we have several in Canada, US, UK. We have a number in Romania. We have a number in Brazil. A number of people in China who are now more of a partner org. Used to be internal. And we have South Africa, Ireland, kind of all over the place, Barbados, Jordan, you name it. Doesn't matter where they live, as long as they can, their time zone is suitable for whatever department they're in, so that they can make the calls at a reasonable hour and not making any life sacrifices, because we don't expect anyone to take late night calls and stuff like that, at least not on the regular. So one of the tools we use to get everyone engaged is an annual meeting. It's one of the few times when the entire company gets together. So every year we pick usually somewhere in Europe, because it's sort of time zone central, at least for flying and stuff. And we have a 4-day agenda where one day is department meetings, another day is cross-company presentations. The third day is unconference, where literally there's no agenda. People come up with their own topics in a bottom-up fashion, and we fill the day's agenda with stuff. And that's my favorite day, because you see what people come up with, and it's not top-down driven. And then the fourth day is sightseeing. So we just did one of those recently, and it's one of the coolest experiences in the year. It's like the United Nations meets together to discuss how to grow InfoQ and QCon. So that's a bit about how we run.
That is amazing, man. And yeah, you like are a pioneer in the crypto world. They call them DAOs, like decentralized organizations, and the remote, just depending on how the terminology, but you like ran it way ahead of the curve of all these different tools now. And like talking with my folks and other people, they think it's not possible to do so. It's like you go to an office space and waste time driving, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it actually works pretty darn well doing it this way. And it's very successful.
It works well, but it's definitely not decentralized. It's distributed. There's still a management layer. There's still a planning process that follows best practices, for example, from the book Scaling Up and stuff like that. There's still an executive team that makes the tough calls. So it's certainly not decentralized, but it is distributed.
Distributed for sure, and how decisions are made and all that, and communication. But you should be so proud of yourself of what you've built, and the teams that you've built around you. Like, because you could just tell that there's a good vibe coming from your organization. I would love to attend one of your conferences one of these days, because you curate some really knowledgeable people too to share their information. So with that, because you said that through this process you've come to the conclusion about how you got into UBI. Can you describe how all that unfolded to where you're like, okay, UBI is a need. It's not going to be a luxury thing. It's like, we are going to need this for humanity to really push forward into this next phase of society.
Yeah, there's a saying in sort of Buddhism. There's many paths to the top of the mountain, and there are many paths that brought me to becoming a CEO activist for UBI and believing that this is something we absolutely need to do. And not only because we need to do it, but I mean, we could have done it, and it's been an aspirational evolution of capitalism forever. Like, even Milton Friedman was for it. So even before automation, it was a thing, and even before globalization, has been disrupting local middle class. People like Martin Luther King were advocating for basic income. So I want to argue that the moral argument for it is very strong. It's just that it's more of an impending need now because of what's going on with the economy. But in my own personal experience, I grew up in a house that had domestic violence, and if my mom had money, she could have left, or at least would have gotten more respect, and just would have been a different power dynamic. Money in some ways is power, or let me rephrase that. I mean, freedom. We talk a lot about freedom. What does freedom mean? Like, freedom of choice is irrelevant if you have no choices. So I think freedom means options, having options in life. And that's what basic income is about, creating options for people, especially for those who have less options, perhaps because they were finding, for whatever reason, whether they're born into it or they fall into it, you find yourself in a situation in life where you have fewer options. And if we can create a society that has real freedom and guarantees a minimum equality of opportunity, not of outcome, of opportunity, through a basic income, we've guaranteed our personal freedoms. And those personal freedoms will trickle up, so to speak, at all levels of society. Because if you have a section of society that isn't afraid to make long-term decisions, they're going to vote smarter, and they're not going to be tricked by charlatans and stuff. So I'm kind of going off, I'm digressing, but my emotional kind of resonance when I first heard Elon Musk talk about it. Yeah, when I first heard Elon Musk talk about it, although he was talking about automation, sort of in my heart, what was stirring was like, shit, how my family would have been different, if my mom had a basic income.
Wow.
So that's one angle, and then Sorry,
I remember. I didn't realize that about your journey, man. That's a lot to go through for sure, and to see it from that lens. I do remember when I was researching you, when we first, just so I knew a little more about what you got going on, was in one of your podcasts you mentioned that you had like a rental property or something where you actually kind of received it, and that kind of gave you the risk taking, like, to go do and start up your business and all that. And that resonated so much with me when I heard that, because I'm like, man, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for, like, my wife is our income winner right now, and I'm still just plugging away on this journey. So that was, and I didn't realize the other side of this. So I have, man, that's a lot to go through, and really push for that side of it, because this could empower so many people if we do it right. And that freedom layer is like, what is freedom to people?
And giving it's options. And like, I think there's a segment of society that has gotten tricked into believing that, like, paying taxes means you have no freedom. No, taxes is how you buy your freedom. Like, if you don't have taxes, you don't have freedom. It's actually the opposite. And so if we can create more freedom in society for people, through government as a distribution vehicle, to make sure we all start with a minimum viable amount of money every month, we're actually securing our freedoms for everyone and ensuring that power doesn't get too displaced towards private interests that could be acting against the interests of the majority. So it's not about big government. It's about actually small government that is redistributing it in a way that keeps people engaged politically and economically.
Yeah, and
So
feeling that
yeah,
they're
so
actually
I guess
working for
yeah.
people. Go ahead. Sorry.
So the other two paths past to my sort of conclusion at UBI. One is you just mentioned. Yes, having been raised very financially paranoid, I did instead of buying a lot of cool stuff for myself in my 20s when I did some startup stuff. Instead, I bought an income property and basically gave myself a basic income, and the confidence I got from that allowed me to then unlock my risk tolerance and then quit and start my own business, the one I'm running now. So I think UBI is actually an innovation strategy, sort of a decentralized bottom-up innovation strategy policy that governments can use if you want to unlock, if you want to recapture the risk tolerance available in society. Yeah, you make sure that people can take a long-term perspective and have the freedom to take risks. And no one's going to take a risk when they have to do two jobs to feed their kids. But people can take a risk when they know that they'll have a guarantee of food or shelter, or at least enough money to be able to get by in some way, shape, or form. And that's what that property did for me. It was like a huge sort of emotional release of fear. It was a broadening of perspectives that allowed me to just think more deeply about my future and what I really wanted to do. And so that's something that we can all have. It's not expensive, so we should do it. We should do it now, even just from that own perspective. Capitalism generates wealth because of innovation. Innovation creates more products and services, solves human needs, and if you want to unlock entrepreneurs to create more wealth for society, wealth is not just money and profits. Wealth is the services we create and the value that adds to people's lives. And so we need a better innovation policy, and basic income is definitely one of those.
Oh man,
So that's one path, and then
yeah, keep going.
yeah, and then the final path was my own experience in my business. And I'm like, hell, my father and uncle lost their jobs in automotive manufacturing after China entered the scene in the late 90s, because nobody could compete. And then, as Andrew Yang often says, even 6 times more jobs were lost due to automation than trade, which my dad confirms, because he's like, yeah, the remaining tool shops he used to work with, because he was an independent tool and die designer, the ones that actually, the half that actually survived that carnage were the ones that automated, because they could automate and become more productive and lower the prices. And the automation itself is also what's caused 6 times more job losses. So I'm like, okay, so that happened to manufacturing. Globalization drove a lot of job loss, and automation did. And now the same thing is happening. It's been happening, in fact, for the last 20 years for all information jobs. Like, not only blue collar manufacturing, but any job that can be done on the internet is now fully globalized, allowing a company like mine to exist, where I can hire anywhere in the world, and I take advantage of that. So we are not in a, people are imagining a country's economy as if it's a closed equilibrium system, which is, it's completely false, because even solopreneurs these days have virtual assistants in the Philippines for $4 an hour. 20 years ago, they'd be hiring those assistants in their own city, probably paying them 15 at the minimum, if not more. So we are now, what we've done to manufacturing is now globalized to all roles that can be done online. So that's something that is frankly, I think, is far more job displacing and far more putting a downward pressure on wages, even than automation. And no one's talking about that. Absolutely nobody's even studied this, but I know it from my own lived experience. This is true. And like anyone, just pull up Upwork and go bid for a job and see what kinds of bids you get from all over the world. You'd have to have a really good reason to hire in your own backyard if you just want to pay 4 times more. So this is like globalization 2.0 is internet driven. It's not manufacturing driven. No one is still moving factories to China, but today they're hiring office workers in Eastern Europe instead of locally. And that is like, it blows my mind that is not being discussed more or studied more in academia. Like, what's the impact of that? But that, I think, is a big reason why you see unemployment rates so low, but wages aren't going high, because there's too much we're in a globalized economy now. There's too much competition. It's just, how could wages go high when you can hire anywhere for anything? That's why we need basic income as another means, because frankly, the money is being made. There's more profit being generated now than ever before. The economy is bigger now than ever before. And as the Federal Reserve Chairman mentioned recently to Congress, this is not a hot job market because wages aren't going up. Wages aren't going up because we're in a globalized context. I think he's not ready to say that. So more money is still being made, just not being made by the majority of listeners to this podcast. So I think basic income is how we can all get a piece of the action and ensure that capitalism is serving everyone's interests, not only a few.
Yeah, I could go, man, that's a really well put way of coming to the conclusion of UBI from many different facets that can probably resonate with probably every one of our listeners in different ways. Because yeah, like for an example from our side is we had a gal working with us from San Francisco, and we had some UI design via Upwork, and we paid, like, we've been very frugal and like budget friendly just to get this bootstrap. She was like, that would be a few grand here in San Francisco or whatever, and we're like, we got this for a couple $100. So
Yeah,
like, it
exactly.
is unbelievable. Upwork and Fiverr, the different ways you can find service jobs and what they are bidding for, and they do a great job. They're super talented, and it's just a contract type scope of work that you give them in some cases. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And so when you look at that, like, what were the first steps to where you're like, okay, this is a massive problem, no one's talking about it? Because you've been involved with some really interesting projects, and would love to hear how you've gotten engaged and pushed things forward from your side of things.
Yeah, so Nick Hanauer has been a huge inspiration for me. He talks about progressive policy and economics from a very pro-capitalist point of view. And I remember him saying something like, if you look at the share of national income, bottom half versus the top 1%, and just project that out a few decades, we'll get to a point where the top 1% are making 35 cents on every dollar, and the bottom half are making 6 cents on every dollar. And he's like, that's not capitalism anymore, that's feudalism. So when you think about that, it gives me chills.
Yeah,
And
it does.
And globalization and automation, and I will just say, let's just say technology is the reason. Because when we say globalization, it's still technology at the end of the day. Now it's internet-driven globalization, and it's still technology that allows tankers to bring goods from China. It's all technology at the end of the day. Nobody could create a globalized supply chain for iPhones without the invention of modern computers and emails. So technology is driving all of this, and and globalization is an offshoot of technology, at least the way it's being experienced today. So technology is the reason, and I can't believe even Hanauer's group is not talking about that. They seem to be stuck in a very industrial era mindset, despite I love them to death, and they are a huge inspiration in me sort of becoming an activist. But when I thought about that national share of income changing, and it's changing similar patterns in Canada and the UK, just it's not far behind what's happening in the US. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, you just draw a line on those charts a few decades into the future, and it's inevitable. And I challenge any listener here to think about what's coming down the pipe that could change that. And I don't think a lot of the policies being discussed today, which are based on what worked in the past, are going to work anymore. Because fundamentally, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we were not rebalancing the global labor market. Labor markets were fairly closed. Maybe it was more of a closed equilibrium system back then. But now we are still in the middle of a global rebalancing in labor and wages. So until one day we have income convergence, where the whole planet's making around the same incomes, at least those who can get educated to certain jobs, we're not going to see a lot of wage growth here. And I know from my own experience that the global middle class is roughly around $30,000 a year. That's not a median middle class income So when you're competing with people who can have a middle class lifestyle in Brazil or in Serbia on 30,000 a year, like, what chance do we have? And that's for information jobs. No tariffs. Trump can't do nothing to stop people from hiring on Upwork for their web design or for their transcription services. And then you have automation, AI. Let's take transcription. I used to get transcripts done for the videos at our events. If you do them locally with a local, meaning in North America, good English writers can quick turnaround. It used to cost $30 to $40 an hour to do that, to pay for that. And going offshore costs about $10, $12 an hour. And now there's AI services that can do it for $1 an hour. And that's just one example of one kind of task. So automation and automation is not just robots. It's SaaS software. It's cloud-based services. It's anything that's driven by AI, and that is continuing to take more work away from people, which results in more people being underemployed, which is why wages probably aren't going up. I think there's a big problem right now with underemployment, where people are just overqualified for what they're doing, and for some reason, no one's talking about that in the headlines either. So if you look at, coming back again to that share of national income changing towards feudalistic levels, again, the mega trends that we're only halfway through, not even, I mean, AI is not even really started yet, are all going to make that way worse. So what the fuck are we going to do?
Yeah.
So I think a dividend is what we need to do, because the money's being made, just not going to be made by most people. And I think we need to see that the gains from all this technological innovation are the shared inheritance of humanity.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the thesis of a TEDx talk I did recently. That's not live yet. But who invented the internet? I mean, Zuckerberg did it. Public financing did. And he's a multi-billionaire because he was able to think about a solution people wanted at a particular period in time that you could quickly build using web software, which was all open source and made for free anyway. And I think today's successes, most of today's millionaires and billionaires are building it off, frankly, public, commonly owned good. But the gains are being concentrated. So I don't see a dividend, a freedom dividend, call it what you want. I don't see that as wealth redistribution. I see that as sharing in the gains that were commonly owned from the beginning, that are based on the contributions of scientists and inventors and risk takers and politicians for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So if capitalism can't evolve to implement some kind of basic taxation method where the gains are shared, even to just some basic level to end poverty, it has to evolve that way. And it's not just about ending poverty. Again, this was an aspiration of Friedman's and Hayek from the Austrian School of Economics, and Nixon, and in the late 60s it almost passed in the US government and only failed by a couple votes. This is not just about it's not about wealth redistribution. This is about capitalism evolving to its natural potential to end poverty and emancipate everyone, and make technology really our shared inheritance, as it should be. So I think that capitalism is missing its plumbing. The plumbing is to circulate money from this shared inheritance that is currently being concentrated for the betterment of everyone. And that's the kind of future that I think we need. And I think that will be not solve every problem, but it'll make every problem easier to solve. Because if people are not afraid, then I think they'll engage more in the problems that we have today.
Mm-hmm. And see a little further into what they want the future to look like. Because I think we've gotten people so short-sighted into what they're going through day to day that they're not even seeing the massive implications of different things coming down the pike. That distribution layer, how concentrated it's getting, is becoming very dangerous to the point where, we need to get our acts together, or else there's two trajectories that I see in my head, and one's very fruitful and abundant, and the other is like dystopia and not very glamorous. And I have two little girls, and I'm fighting for that future where it's a utopias view on what this world looks like. And so, because you started that CEO for basic income in Canada. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then some of the challenges that from a governmental side of implementation may have? Because in Canada they had that pilot program, and then there was a swing in politics and whatnot, and I think the guy pulled it out and lowered the price of beer or something like that. Was so can you tell us a little bit about that process of going through that governmental side of things and curating all those CEOs around this kind of movement that has been stirring up in Canada there?
Yeah. So Canada's usually ahead of the U.S. in terms of progressive policies. But so what happened? There was a previous government, a left-leaning government in the province of Ontario, which had implemented a pilot, the world's leading pilot. In fact, the only pilot, one of only 2 pilots in the world of that really would have a lot to learn from. The other being the one in Kenya that Give Directly is doing right now, where 12,000 people in 3 cohorts will be getting a long-term basic income in some cases. Ontario was also a real basic income. It was really enough to cover basic needs, where I think the people in the lowest, it was actually negative income tax style, where it was graduated amounts of money. The less you had, the more you got. And it phased out as you made more money. So those who are completely like not working, completely in a bad place. I think we're getting like $18,000 or $20,000 Canadian a year, which is is enough to make ends meet, depending on how you structure things. And it was phasing out. So the working poor were also getting it, which is also really important facts about basic income is, poverty. I think it eliminates the working poor. And, I think it creates a middle class way of life for everyone. And that is capitalism's potential to do if we implement such a dividend. And that's really important to have to no longer have a working poor and have a giant middle class and a high income earners and rich people as well. Like that's what we can have instead of poverty and working poor, and then a increasingly shrinking middle class, as an aside. But so we had a real basic income here, 4,000 people in 3 parts of the province getting it, and it kind of came out of nowhere because the previous government just announced it. Most people in Ontario had never even heard of basic income. So there's some really real progressives in the Liberal Party here who wanted to test it. Unfortunately, they had some hiccups getting the implementation started. So it was by the time the elections came around, the pilot was only 1 year in, and if they had been able to move faster when they initially announced it, probably it would have been 2 years in or near completion. So a new progressive conservative government got elected, which at least they used to be progressive. They still have it in the name, and they just cancel it, just basically without warning. Although they had said they won't cancel it, they canceled it, and it was a huge tragedy because 4,000 people suddenly thought they had income security for another 2 years, and then they didn't. And although they gave them 6 months of grace pay, announced a month later after the people were scared of what they're going to do, and they just canceled it without even the fact that most of the money had already been spent, was allocated, including very savvy research teams that were going to be studying all this. They just canceled all of that. So I was really upset. And I had just started my first ever sabbatical in my whole life. Like I've never had more than 2 weeks off at once since high school. And last summer I was going to start 3 months off, and this happened 3 weeks in when I just started to relax. Imagine like working your whole life a certain way, and then suddenly you can just start to relax. And this happened. I'm like, shit, what am I going to do? I got to do something about this. And I thought, well, what assets do I have? I'm like, well, I know a lot of other business leaders because I've been networking my whole life. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if the business community showed up for the basic income and asked that the trial not be canceled? Because people seem to think that BI is some leftist pipe dream, when in reality it's very pro-capitalist and very good for the economy. It is an economic stimulus. Those who spend the least, who have the least, spend the most, and it just keeps the economy working well and creates jobs. And I think a capitalism with a basic income will be far more effective and will be growing a lot faster, even long term, once the numbers balance out, than one that doesn't have a basic income. So I thought this is an opportunity to share that, to get that narrative out, while also perhaps trying to save the pilot. So me and a colleague, Paul Vallée, who runs one of Canada's top AI consulting and product companies, just worked our network of every CEO we've ever met in our lives and managed to get 120 signatures on a letter that laid out the economic narratives for basic income. You can find that letter at ceosforbasicincome.ca. So that's what we did. So in October 18th, we launched this letter. We had a press conference in partnership with the Green Party at the local government building. We were in the national news. We were in a local newspaper, and it seemed to get a lot of people's attention. The leader of the federal opposition party, the NDP, personally thanked one of the people in our group, and then went on and called for more pilots the week after, using language from our letter, which is great because we managed to educate them on automation and all the points we put in the letter. And we know that the leadership in the federal party, the Liberal Party, also read the letter. Hopefully, a lot of the conservatives read the letter, because I do think BI is actually a conservative idea. So I don't know what their opposition is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did. So I think at least they didn't reverse the cancellation of the pilot, but at least we were able to seed these narratives, these talking points that I think are very important, that people need to understand that basic income is pro-growth, it's good for the economy, it's pro-free market. It'll lead to a more evolved form of capitalism. There's nothing to be afraid of here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we did.
Awesome. Well, thank you for I couldn't imagine on sabbatical and you're like getting an email or skim through the news and you get that through your phone or computer or whatever, and you're like, I could only imagine your heart sinking, like, what? Come on, like, oh man. And then to actually just start hustling right away into it just shows the passion that you have. Because that to me is my biggest concern of a governmental implementation is the swing of winds. And it's like, if you implement it and then you cancel it, and it could happen at a snap of a thumb, how it could suppress a society even more. So that's where I see a free market approach being somewhat of a more realistic approach if we can engrave it into a money supply. I still think the quickest, easiest route to get meaningful money into the hands of the masses is through the government, but I think over time that may occur. So do you see the hurdles of doing a governmental side of things slower than trying to do a free market, or do you even see a need for a free market approach to help relieve and accelerate these discussions more, so they actually get their acts together?
I think ultimately, short term, I do think a government is the most effective vehicle to implement this. Because, I mean, once you get the first one elected that does it, it's there and no one's going to take it away. I mean, right now in Alaska, both liberals and conservatives were vying for the election to preserve the freedom, the wealth, the permanent fund dividend they have there on oil revenues. And it's funny because the left-leaning approach to preserving the dividend from oil revenues, because they were having some budget shortfalls, was to increase taxes. And the right-leaning approach to preserve the dividend was to cut services. So that's, much like how the world would be even without the dividend. But the dividend becomes a permanent fixture that people want, is popular. They start to rely on and leverage. And then you just have the same old left-right arguments about budget cuts. And now you have a Republican government elected that wants to cut funding to important social programs instead of to the dividend. And so I hope that doesn't get spun into an anti-UBI story, because it's not the case. That would be happening anyway, whether there's a dividend in place or not. But it just shows that once such a thing gets implemented, it'll be very difficult to remove it, and because it already would have become a permanent part of the functioning of the economy, which I don't think is something to be afraid of, because we are already dependent on a lot of things to run the economy. We need roads, we need electricity, we need a court system. So a dividend that ends poverty just becomes something, a public utility, like electricity or roads or airports, something that we just assume is a given,
Mm-hmm.
and something that's for the benefit of everyone. And nobody would say we should start digging up roads because we need to cut taxes. It's just like nobody would say we should reduce the freedom dividend because we're in a recession. In fact, it should be increased in a recession because it's a stimulus. So I think government is long term the best way for this to be done, or short term, medium term anyway. Not long term, of course. I'm sure a lot of the listeners of this podcast, I'm not sure if this is a crypto podcast or not. Is this a crypto primarily podcast, or?
We have a pretty good spectrum of people. Something we're really proud of is, like, a lot of people don't even know about crypto that got drawn
Okay.
to mana. So we're the first interaction of crypto that they don't even touch other cryptos. And then we
Okay,
have a
cool.
subset that is like the crypto airdrop people.
Oh, so this is primary mana, at least listeners on this podcast, I guess. Or...
That's the general audience, and then it's expanding into different networks of different
Okay.
that are affiliated. So
yeah, so long term. Okay, so you can probably cut the last part if you want. So I mentioned the government part. Now, very long term, I do think a monetary supply crypto blockchain based approach, I mean, could change the face of planet Earth and result in the the utopia that we're all working towards in the crypto community. But I think I don't really see how short term or even the medium term. I think you guys are doing really important work at Mana, but until there's a way to establish a utilitarian value of this currency that's big enough to pay meaningful UBI, I don't know how it's going to happen. And it seems that someone somewhere is going to have to give up profit motive in some sort of business model that is tied to a currency like Mana in order for there to be a funding model that is independent of a government. Because if just like the U.S. dollar is somehow vaguely tied to oil, if a cryptocurrency has to be tied to some sort of revenue or profit making thing in order for it to raise in value enough to pay meaningful amount of UBI. So someone's gonna have to give up their profit at some stage, or some new enlightened class of capitalists just somehow share something from their business models into a currency, or else I just don't see how it's going to happen. But I'm not a crypto expert. I'm not even a intermediate level knowledge by any means. I just don't understand how valuation will grow on a crypto based UBI in the next 10 or 20 years based on the way the system works today. So I do think a government could implement UBI in the next 10 or 20 years faster than a crypto project could. Unless again you got the world's billionaires somehow dedicating all of their wealth into a cryptocurrencies fund, and then it's actually backed by something that has a value and can distribute from there. So I don't know. Otherwise, I just don't get it.
yeah, no, you actually described it quite well of like what at least the approach that we think is the only practical way to do it is to have backing of revenue generating businesses and profitable businesses to support it. Because in the crypto space, it's pretty nasty right now. It still blows me away that I've gotten into this crazy world, dedicated, and sacrificed everything into this. But it's mainly a speculation evaluation in a lot of these, and I think we're going to go through a pretty nasty flush out of projects, and the ones that are really trying to solve real problems will come to fruition. And at least that's been like you talked about the core values at the beginning of this podcast, is like that's our main goal, is like how can we solve poverty, how can we eliminate poverty, because this isn't necessarily just a country to country issue. This is a global, we're all brothers and sisters in this game together, and the technology's there, the innovation's there, and if we all work towards common goals, we can do amazing things as a species. And just getting that attention focused on some of these problems, and not just going day in, day out, fulfilling their basic needs and trying to solve these bigger problems, I think is what drives me. Because if we could close out, that you could give a little bit of what the future you're hopeful for and working towards, and to leave our audience with just something they could take home with and really think about of what they can do maybe in their day-to-day life to really make an impact into their communities. If you could share a bit of that, that would be much appreciated. You have a wealth of knowledge that I have a huge amount of respect for, and we could dive down different rabbit holes. So just again, thank you for coming on here, Floyd, and sharing your knowledge with us.
that technologies are shared inheritance, then implementing a dividend off of its gains, at least at some basic level, to end poverty, is not a socialist thing. It's not a left or right thing. It's very much a reciprocity thing. You know, who owns technology? You know, an entrepreneur can see a new way to package a solution to solve a problem and create value for society. Yes, but they're building off the commons. They're building off things that we commonly inherited at birth, meaning technology, the air, the oil, everything around us. So I don't think we should fall into the trap of seeing UBI as wealth redistribution. We should see it as rather, at the very least, a way to implement the missing plumbing out of capitalism, to share in the gains that share in the wealth that is being created and added back to the commons, to our common wealth, which is technology and the knowledge that we build off across generations, where one product, you know, innovates and jams and gets better off of another product, and that product innovates and gets jammed off of other things. And even the iPhone today wouldn't exist without the public financing into academia that generated the early stage inventions that formed it, and inventions in theoretical physics and all these things that were publicly financed. So I think we need to start seeing technology as our shared inheritance and implementing a dividend off of its gains, a piece of the capitalist plumbing that we should have implemented in the late 60s, when even the biggest capitalists of them all was calling for it, like Milton Friedman and Hayek and Republicans in the government at the time. This is not some socialist thing. This is very much an evolution of capitalism. Even in the days when Cold War with communism, those were the days when people we almost passed something like a basic income in the US. So like, resist these BS statements that UBI is socialist, because in the same year that 500,000 troops were sent to Vietnam to stop the spread of communism was the same year that 1,000 economists in the US signed a letter saying that a basic income is compatible with American values.
Very good. Yeah.
And the final piece I'll say on that maybe all the listeners can take this talking point forward, is that there was a time when having a job was a way to share in the gains. Because before the great decoupling, and please Google that if you don't know what it means, before the mid-70s, when technology started tracking productivity was growing faster than wages, and wages stopped growing. Until that time, we had 30 years where wages were growing in lockstep productivity. So the more the economy was producing, the more people were needed to produce stuff, the higher wages went. Wages were growing like 2.6% on average per year. Since then, they've been growing like nothing, almost zero. So there was a time when our imagination of what capitalism is, where we're just having a job is a way to benefit and grow and take part in our gains. There was a time when that was true, but it's not true anymore. So it doesn't matter how hard you work, you're not going to get your share of the gains that are coming off of technology, which is our shared inheritance. So I think it's time for a dividend as a way to correct for that and make sure that our inheritance is being spread in a way that is to the benefit of everyone. So that's the last thing I'll say.
Awesome. Yeah, just how I comprehend that last little bit you say it really well, is that I think people tend to think that it's like you take away to pull something to give over here. But when you talk about wealth and value, is that there isn't necessarily an end point of how much wealth and value gets created. It's almost how I just went through it personally. I was asked, how much do you love your daughters, you know, and do you think you'll split your love between your new daughter now? And it's like, no, love just gets expanded. You just expand it, and that just sunk, and I started like crying, like, oh my gosh, that's and how it relates to all this, is that it's all just an expansive thing of pushing humanity forward. And if we can inject hope into people's lives that there is a bright future coming, then we're gonna do some amazing things. And it just starts little by little, and just really take that I think away from this. If that was the last thing, is just that we can do this as a people, and really make this happen for the next generations to come. So yeah, just thank you so much, Floyd. And yeah, where could people learn more about your company and you as because I know you do some blogging every so often. Is there any places we can land people to learn more about CEOs for basic income and the
Yeah.
product?
So at ceosforbasicincome.ca, you can read the letter that they wrote. Depending on when this podcast goes live, there's a site up soon for a nonprofit team that I put together in Canada that is promoting pro-growth economic narratives. You'll find that at UBIworks.ca. And as for me, yeah, just Google. I'm the only Floyd Marinescu on the planet, so I'm not maintaining my homepage very well, so Google's my homepage, I guess.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, sir, so much for what you do.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Hedge for Humanity podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and give us a positive rating.